preliminary rounds that all contestants partook in. We then had our top 11 go to semifinals, and now we have our top 7 competing in the final round. All the contestants wrote their own personal and unique speeches, but they were all given the same topic. This idea changed the way I see the world. And the contestants were asked to write about an idea or a topic that they learned at Dickinson that changed the way they act, that changed the way they think. So I just want to make a note to say I'm so proud of all our contestants who participated in the contest, including our finalists here with us tonight. So
even as a kid, I loved school. I cherished the idea of a place that existed solely to help you grow. So when 10-year-old me found out that I got into my dream middle school, you can only imagine how happy I was. It was the United Nations International School, filled with kids from all over the world. I knew it'd be straight out of the fairy tales I conjured in my young head. My old school was a Montessori school that was so small we didn't have separate grades for some classes. And to make it all worse, it was literally called the family school. Located right next to a church I knew nothing about, just like my friends there. But while this new school was an international school, it was a private school, filled with wealthy European students who had never encountered the word no before. I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was just surviving. I remember my mom crying in the car on our way to school when I told her I didn't know why my stomach hurt so bad when we approached the school parking lot. I thought I was just sick until this happened almost every day, even through high school. And high school was definitely not for me, and it showed because I had been to 5 high schools for the 5 years it took for me to complete it. But I did meet my best friend Emily, and she once told me, if you ever think a challenge is too great, regardless of the outcome, if you truly give it your all, you gain a level of wisdom that no professor could ever give you. So seize the chance to learn. And that's exactly what I did. Getting into Dickinson made me realize that my childhood dream was absolutely nothing compared to getting into my top choice for college. And so far, one of my favorite classes I've taken is Supriya Dixit's health psychology class. Quoted by her, the most important takeaway from the class is how to manage one's stress better. This overarching and seemingly natural principle that consumes a being to desperately search for a solution with engulfing urgency. But actually, as our textbook defines it, stress is a negative emotional experience accompanied by predictable biochemical and physiological changes. And that predictability comes from Richard Lazarus, who came up with the cognitive appraisal theory of stress, that basically states what matters is not what event occurs, but how we perceive and interpret that event, aka appraisals. And this idea changed how I see the world. How our perception of stress, and not the stressor itself, determines its power over us. So here's how it works. When something stressful happens, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in a way you all probably know as your fight or flight response. But if the stress doesn't go away, your body has a backup system, known as the HPA axis. It stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The stress basically alarms your hypothalamus to tell your pituitary to signal your adrenal glands to release cortisol. And cortisol prepares your body to deal with stress by basically just keeping you alert. It is very helpful, but in the short term. When stress is constantly occurring, your brain keeps appraising events as threats, and cortisol will flood your body over and over again. And it's absolutely evolutionary because it causes the same reaction as if you were being chased by a bear. This is also why it's dangerous. Remember my stomach hurting in middle school? This is a classic example of slowed down digestion due to stress. But this is when it gets actually interesting. If you change your appraisal and see the event as a challenge rather than a threat, your brain will not release the same amount of cortisol, and your body's reaction is completely different. This is because your brain now actually perceives your resources as being sufficient enough to meet the demands of the stressor. But this didn't just change my relationship with stress. It gave me back a sense of control I longed for in every dream I had, whether 10 years old, 18, or 21. When I was just a kid, I didn't understand why I'd feel physically sick, or why I couldn't breathe when a teacher asked me a question I almost always knew the answer to, or why I checked the mirror 5 times before school, not for vanity, but to make sure I didn't look like an easy target. And years later, when I lost Emily, the girl who never failed to tell me how proud she was of me, I did not know how to handle my grief. So I turned to drugs, a prescription I wrote myself to quiet everything I couldn't say out loud. But yet, while I still failed at getting rid of the stress, my brain never failed me. It protected me from every bear I encountered. And today, I'm proud to say everything I've accomplished, I've done for her. And I'm relieved to know that stress is not a defining factor of your prosperity. Because now I catch myself in moments of stress, like doing this speech or studying for the brain and behavior exam I was sure I'd fail, but got the highest grade in the class. It has reshaped the role I want to play in this world. As a future psychological researcher, I want my work to go beyond the lab, to change how we support students in schools and shape real policies that recognize the biological toll of stress. And I want everyone to know that their stress is not a threat, but a privilege to challenge yourselves. And it's not just a dream, it's science. And for the first time in my life, stress does not define me. I define it. Thank you.
Before this semester, I thought I knew nature well. I would spend time outdoors, walking through the woods, enjoying the fresh air and the sounds of birds and leaves rustling. Nature was something I admired, something that I appreciated, but never really thought much about. I always knew that animals faced challenges, pollution, deforestation, habitat loss, but never fully understood how these impacts played out in ways I couldn't see, let alone understand. I didn't know that something as simple as a drive down the highway could affect the very ecosystems I cherished. The idea that changed the way I see the world came from my wildlife monitoring class with Professor Van Fleet, where I was challenged to pay attention to the smallest details in nature, to document what I saw and noticed. I thought this would be a simple task, take notes on trees, birds, maybe a few tracks in the dirt. But one day, my experience in the woods completely shifted my perspective. It wasn't just about making observations. It was about understanding how these details told a larger story. Every leaf, every footprint, even the distant sound of animals, seemed to have a deeper significance. And soon I realized that nature wasn't just a place to appreciate from a distance. It was an intricate system that required careful attention to truly understand. It was a typical journaling trip. I walked through the woods, took in the usual sights and sounds, and made my notes and sketches about what I observed. But then, as I walked back towards the road, I noticed something. A smell. At first, I thought it was nothing, just the typical earthy scent of the woods. But the further I walked, the more it lingered. And then the smell became unmistakable. It was gut-wrenching. As I followed the scent, I came across a shocking sight. A heap of dead deer. It was a collection of roadkill left to rot away in the woods. I was taken aback, confused, and honestly horrified. I had never expected to see anything like this. And at first I didn't know what it was. It was a collection of bodies, a graveyard, scattered haphazardly, each seemingly untouched by human hands. It took me a while to figure out what had happened there. And it was the first time I realized just how many animals, large and small, suffer because of human causes. I stood there, frozen, processing the sight, and felt the gravity of the moment. It was then that I realized how often we overlook something as tragic as wildlife collisions. We talk about the dangers to wildlife from climate change, from poaching, both of which are very important. But why don't we talk about the millions of animals killed every year by vehicles? These collisions are something we can't see, something that's hidden from us. People don't want to talk about it because it's disturbing and easier to ignore. But that day in the woods, with the deer that I saw, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And it wasn't just about the animals. It was about how we, as a society, avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. The devastation caused by these collisions is just as real as any environmental threat. Yet, it remains out of sight and out of mind. It made me realize that even the most basic aspects of our everyday life, like driving our cars, can have deep and lasting effects. Now, when I walk through the woods, I don't just see the trees and animals. I see the broader impacts, the subtle effects that are easy to overlook. I notice the wildlife crossings, I look for signs of animal movement, and I think about the roads that I drive on and the impact they have on the environment. My time spent outdoors has become a consideration of balance, how every small action can have profound effects. And this change didn't just happen in the way that I see nature. It's also changed the way that I act. I've learned so much more about the interactions between species in our ecosystems. I've become more vocal about the importance of protecting wildlife, and I've started to share what I've learned with others. I've learned that even the smallest changes in our daily behavior can make a difference in how we treat the world around us. Now, I started my wildlife monitoring class thinking I would just be learning about animals and maybe collecting some data. But what I didn't expect was that it would change how I see the world entirely. I now know that paying attention to the small, often hidden details is just as important as looking at the big picture. Through this class, I've learned that conservation isn't just about protecting grand landscapes. It's about safeguarding the quiet moments, the hidden struggles of the creatures that inhabit our world. I'll never forget that pile of dead deer. It's an image that will stay with me forever, not because of the horror it caused, but because it opened my eyes to something we too often ignore. It taught me that the world is full of hidden challenges, and we need to face them, no matter how uncomfortable they might be. And now, when I look at nature, I see not just the beauty, but the complexities. And I know that by paying attention, we can make a difference. That one moment in the woods changed everything for me, and I will never look at the world the same way again. Thank you.
I am not who I was 4 years ago. In many ways, that person's brain has become compost, mulch, nurturing the man in progress speaking to you in this moment. I have changed in my time at Dickinson, but changed is not exactly the best word for what I wish to describe to you. A better word is loss. I have lost in my time at Dickinson. Now, that's a strong statement, it's a good hook, but I don't think it properly conveys what I want to discuss with all of you today. Learning is a form of losing oneself constantly and consistently. In my years at Dickinson, the idea of loss being an integral part of learning new ideas has changed the way I see myself in the world. Is loss a bad thing? Culturally, of course it is. It's the bad outcome of a ball game. It's a word preceded by sorry for your on a sympathy card. You lose a pet, you lose a friend, you lose a memory. But how can we think about this a little differently? In my first year at Dickinson, I signed up for a course entitled Oral History of the Bosnian Diaspora in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Long title. And I understood each of those words individually, but together they formed more of a curiosity, sitting in my course request page online. Knowing nothing, but eager to learn, I dove into this abyssal academic unknown. Guided by Professor Qualls of the history department, this small class of 8 met with immigrants from Bosnia living in Cumberland County to record their life's testimony. I was a newly minted adult at 18, fresh-faced, full of ideas and optimism and self-confidence, self-importance, and I sat for an hour in the back of a newly built Carlisle townhouse listening to a man tell me about his life. Now, for some context. The modern-day nation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the 1990s was the site of the largest ethnic cleansing in Europe since the Holocaust, a genocide perpetrated against the Muslim inhabitants of that community. This man seated in front of me in a gray sweatshirt, who had so kindly offered me a soda while showing me photos of his nieces, was telling me about his experiences during that period. A father shot in the woods. A gymnasium full of women and children trapped. Piles of corpses. The worst moments of his life. Leaving that session, I was changed. My previous self was lost. A sense of self-importance in the world was lost as well, which admittedly is healthy from time to time. My knowledge was changed, so the me that housed that previous knowledge was changed as well, sloughed away, lost, like snakeskin. I now understand this loss applies to anything learned. You lose and you gain at the same time. Since then, I've experienced hundreds of losses of old selves. Each course reshapes how I understand anything. Like film in sunlight, when I'm exposed to new information, my knowledge changes permanently, and so do I. But I will never mourn this loss, though. I'll never regret losing the man I was before I became steeped in new information on culture, history, art, science. Each course gives birth to a new person. And if this is how it goes for me, it must be how it goes for all of you here, in this room, in this college, and on this planet. Globally, we are experiencing a loss of self constantly, and we get to make ourselves anew constantly, too. Dickinson has made me appreciate the new versions of myself that I get to create with each new idea learned. The years have not always been easy, but good days, and difficult days, and terrible days are all made more digestible knowing they're part of this process of loss. That oral history class project at the beginning of my academic career helped me realize that, and I will always be grateful for that. As I move into my future, I must remember that every day is an opportunity to learn something and to become a more evolved, smarter, humbler, more self-assured individual. To lose a past self and gain a better present. I am not who I was 4 years ago. I'm not who I was 4 minutes ago, and neither are any of you, and neither is anybody on this planet. So, isn't that loss something beautiful? Thank you.
Growing up, I never felt like my family had less. In fact, I sometimes felt more privileged than my peers. My clothes were washed and ironed weekly, and I was often permitted to buy snacks from local street vendors after school. When my father and my mother divorced, I began to notice my mother's subtle struggles, when she bought groceries on credit, or waited until we ate before she ate. Despite my mother's challenges supporting 3 kids on low wages, she never wanted to be seen as someone who needed help or was dependent. So it was unexpected when she went to the social services office on my island to request food stamps. Looking for assistance in what was the lowest point in her life, she was denied. Although I did not have to bear the brunt of this decision, I have since carried that weight silently. This weight was partially lifted when I first heard the term that helped me understand what my mother experienced and transformed the way that I saw my previous community service engagement and my future career plans. That term is the street-level bureaucracy. In my clinical psychology seminar, Evan Dubchansky, a social worker and a Dickinson College alumnus, came to speak about his experience and trajectory throughout the psychology field. After I listened to Dubchansky speak, I asked him questions regarding my own trajectory in the psychology field. Now, as a senior, I'm sure the other seniors in the room can relate, but feeling some anxiety regarding the job search, I was hoping to get some grand tip that would put into clarity what I'd been feeling, the uncertainty. He responded that everyone should find their why for being in the psychology field. To me, this seemed rather obvious. I mean, even when I joined Dickinson and chose psychology as a major, I had a why in mind, or so I thought. But Dubchansky's explanation captivated me. He cautioned against choosing a why that simply consisted of helping people. And he mentioned the idea that helping people can easily turn into a street-level bureaucracy. Street-level bureaucracy is a term coined by Michael Lipsky, a political scientist, And it posits that under time and monetary constraints, social workers, welfare workers, teachers, and police officers might deny access to people whom they once promised to serve. Now they, in their power in everyday situations, might, for instance, if it was a welfare worker who a community member had approached asking for foods, an extra bus pass, because say they lost their previous one, that welfare worker might easily become a street-level bureaucrat by adhering to the rules of their company and denying that community member an extra bus pass. This warning stunned me. Throughout both my high school and my college career, I participated in community service opportunities and was often in situations where I assisted people, but I had been a street-level bureaucrat. In my freshman year of high school, I volunteered at a local community kitchen on a wintry Saturday morning. I served plates of food to community members who came in. Some came in with family members, some came in alone, but all of them were bundled up in jackets to escape the cold. And one woman in particular stood out to me. She came in and had a meal with her kids, and after she was finished having her meal, she approached me and asked me if she can get an extra plate of food. Now, I, adhering to the rules of my supervisors, told her that she could not get an extra plate of food until everyone had at least gotten one. I remember the pit that formed in my stomach as she begrudgingly walked away, holding her paper cup of coffee. At that moment, I remembered the struggles of my own mother years ago. Dubchansky's comment forced me to reckon not only with the ways that I had been affected by street-level bureaucracy, but that I'd upheld it. I began to question how I may contribute to the street-level bureaucracy as a future clinical psychologist. I aspire to use therapy to help underprivileged communities like my own improve their mental health outcomes and hopefully eradicate the mental health stigma. I wondered what I would do in the case that one of my clients came in and their insurance runs out and they can no longer afford therapy. Would I turn them away? Although in many cases, becoming a part of the street-level bureaucracy is inevitable, this talk encouraged me that I can and I should take steps to reduce my role in the street-level bureaucracy. As Dubchansky initially noted, keeping a why in mind helps avoid the oftentimes idealistic and imposing goal of helping people. I will keep my goal and reason for being involved in clinical psychology in the forefront and will continue to view the humanity of each community that I work with. I hope that future social workers are also inspired to refine their reasons for being involved in their work. Oftentimes, they're the first point of contact for many disadvantaged people. And it's important that they recognize that they too can be social street-level bureaucrats. Street-level bureaucracy is not only a disservice to the people whom we attempt to assist, but it does us a disservice when we, despite pure intentions, may maintain disparities that we had desired to eradicate. The first step in acknowledging and addressing the street-level bureaucracy is to uplift the humanity of every person. I endeavor to be a part of this change. Thank you.
When I was a kid, I used to be obsessed with animals. I mean, really obsessed, but that's every little kid, right? Every day, immediately after school, you find me glued to the TV on Natural Wild, Animal Planet. Or maybe I want to feel real special about myself and see that viewers like you message on PBS, watching Dinosaur Train, Saboomafoo, or Wildcrats. The thing that kept me coming back to find out more about these different animals were their superpowers. The same applied with actual superheroes. It seemed like every animal and superhero had this unique ability that made them stand out. A peregrine falcon and Superman gliding at 250 miles per hour with ease. A mantis shrimp and Spider-Man punching things with excess of 1,500 newtons of force. A common basilisk in a flash running on water effortlessly. I mean, all these amazing creatures with all these amazing abilities always used to leave me going, what exactly are we good for? For lack of better words, I thought mankind was inadequate. So I always used to ask the question, what is man's superpower? Now, 9 times out of 10, the answer I get back would be something along the lines of intelligence, and to be honest, every time I hear it, I'd roll my eyes. To me, intellect was overrated. Sure, being smart and building stuff is cool, but imagine running as fast as a Hellcat going down Route 6. Sounds like a fair trade to me. To have my curiosity truly satisfied, though, I went to the smartest man I've ever known. He worked for UNESCO, was a professor back home in Nigeria for 25 plus years. He even taught at Georgetown for a time. His name was Charles Wambebe, but to me, it was just Grandpa. I asked my grandpa the impossible question, and he answered saying that all of us are descendants of men who ran down their prey for hours. Be it in the summer heat or the winter cold, all of our ancestors chased after our source of nutrition for hundreds of miles at a time. All right, take a step back and think about that for a little bit. I think a lot of us here have a hard time picturing ourselves running after a chicken for more than 15 seconds, let alone a woolly mammoth for a good 6-7 hours. Thousands of years ago, your life depended on you chasing down an animal 5 times bigger than you with nothing but some dainty sticks that you call spears. And some of you have the audacity to complain about walking to class at 9. The reality is, man was built for long distance. Other animals can run faster, sure, but stamina is our superpower. On November 17th, 2022, I lost a man who taught me about man's superpower. See, when growing up, all you think about are the perks of getting older, but never about the things, or rather the ones you lose in the process. To cope with the pain, I thought about my favorite memories of him, and I always used to go back to the answer he gave me to the impossible question I posed to him all those years back, over and over and over again. Fast forward, and it's November 2024, near the 2-year anniversary of his passing, and I was assigned to go on an all walk for my practical ethics class. The idea behind an all walk is that to be in awe is to recognize what life is giving. So, to be truly grateful for that, I was told by Professor McKiernan to take an hour-long walk without any of my devices and observe the things around you that make you go, wow. Discussing the idea of awe always led me back to my love for nature as a kid, which in turn led back to me thinking about my grandpa. And so when I was on my journey, and the first thing I see is this man going on a jog with my grandpa in my mind, I had an epiphany. Man's superpower doesn't just revolve around our physical endurance, but our emotional endurance as well. See, for you and I to keep running, we have to sweat. Sweating cools you down so you don't overheat. It keeps you going, making each and every single step you take just a bit more bearable. Does it make you smell? Yeah, but everything has a byproduct to it. Now take that same concept and think about the worst emotional pain you've been through. Losing a loved one, growing distant with childhood friends, breaking up with your significant other. Heartache is one of those things that we all go through. It's the kind of pain that's really hard to put into words, but that heartache, that pain, it's what makes us human. And like sweat, pain is an unfortunate byproduct for a greater gain. If life really was just sunshine and rainbows, there'd be no room for growth. Without problems, innovation would cease. Life at its essence wouldn't be as precious because we wouldn't have the opportunity to be truly grateful for what life has to offer. All right, let me put it to you like this. Would you have loved your first car so much if it wasn't for the amount of work you put into saving up money for it? Would you be that psyched about hitting your bench PR if not for the uncomfortable pain you put into getting stronger every day? Would you even feel that good about the exams you aced without the countless hours studying? Okay, I know that sounds like I'm lying, but for real, things in life are a little easier when you work for it a little. And with work comes pain. And pain allows us to put things into perspective because without perspective, nothing matters. There's this little French saying I like, and it goes a little something like this. On s'adapte, on continue, parce qu'il y a pire dans la vie. We adapt, we continue, because there are worse things in this life. Hundreds of generations have passed since we've used our superpower for its original use, but in a way we still use it in our daily lives. Our physical endurance is awe-inspiring, but the way our emotional strength parallels it is exactly what makes humanity so special. Thank you.
Poem 5, Catullus. Let us live and let us love. From very young age, I knew that I was different. I I knew that I was what society would consider abnormal. I didn't like boys like the other girls my age did. I didn't have a crush on them. And quite frankly, they weren't even attractive. At the end of the day, I knew in my heart that I liked girls. I liked women, and I wasn't going to force myself into a box. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But as any rational person would do, I jumped straight into denial. I deep dived into the world of academics, searching for a distraction, something that would make me feel normal, something that I would feel grounded in, regardless of the fact that society knew that I wasn't normal, and I knew that I wasn't either. And I found the world of classical studies. I loved the languages, I loved the art, I loved the culture. I loved everything about it. But I found a little niche that spoke dear to me, and that was Roman sexuality, and more specifically, the fluidity of it. In Rome, sexuality was not determined by the gender of one's partner. Instead, it was based on power dynamics. Who was the submissive? Who was the dominant? Who held the power in the relationship? And while that was very interesting to me, what really made me stop and think about it is the fact that Romans truly did not care what the gender of your partner was. I turned to Latin poetry. I found an author. His name is Catullus. This man was down bad, astronomically. He wrote over 50 poems about a woman that he devoted himself to, under the pseudonym of Lesbia. However, as wonderful as that was, and as much as I related to that, unfortunately, he also wrote about a lover that he had, Juventius, another pseudonym. That lover, Juventius, was a man. And you know, if Catullus could do it, why couldn't I? And I thought about something my mother once said to me. Sam, you cannot change the way that people think. You cannot change what people believe. All you can do is learn to accept yourself. And I thought back to that moment, and I was like, wow, Mom, you were right about that. I had spent so long forcing myself into boxes and labels that I didn't fit into. I was shackling myself with the chains of societal expectation. I was not living my life as who I was. And I so desperately wanted to. And that's when I decided, maybe being a lesbian and admitting it isn't the worst thing in the world. The fluidity of Roman sexuality changed the way that I see the world, in the fact that it helped me accept who I was and love who I was. Love is a universal concept. People always talk about falling in love and how beautiful that was. And I was forcing myself to never accept that. I was forcing myself to never live in that moment. My love for another woman is something beautiful. It is a nebulous thing that one cannot describe in words. I love her. And that is something I will take to my grave. I realized that I was boxing myself into these rigid labels for no reason. I was not straight. I I most certainly was not bisexual. I was gay. And after reading the works of Catullus and deep diving into the world of classics, I came to the conclusion that for once, I'm going to let myself live. And I'm going to let myself love. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jack Scantland. Like Sophie said, I'm a freshman double majoring in international studies and Spanish. Before coming to college, I never thought about the way I spoke. To me, it was just the way words naturally formed in my mouth, shaped by my upbringing in Louisville, pronounced Louisville, Kentucky. And I knew there'd be challenges associated with going to college in Pennsylvania, being 9 hours away from home. But I never thought that justifying my pronunciation or watching people physically react to me saying where I'm from would be some of those challenges. Like every first year, my first week at Dickinson was defined by 3 questions. What's your name? What's your major? And where are you from? And I quickly discovered through this process that for some, Kentucky carried a certain weight of connotations with it. I could see it when my peers poked fun at my pronunciation of certain words, or when they would bring up Pennsyltucky, something they were a lot more excited to laugh about than to explain to me. But there's one instance that stands above the rest. I was giving a tour, and I introduced myself. Hi, my name is Jack. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky. And before I can even finish my first sentence, a parent in the group from a northern state gasped and took a step away from me. I remember calling my Nana after the tour ended, trying to make sense of what had just happened. And for context, my Nana was born and raised in Appalachia, Clay County, Kentucky, and now lives in a town whose only grocery store is a mom and pop shop, if that gives you an idea to her character. She told me, well, Jack, bless your heart, because that just ain't right. And she was right. It wasn't okay. She then proceeded to tell me about how when my mom went to college, people would call her stupid straight to her face because of the twang that she spoke with. And while I was comforted by what my Nana had told me, I still found myself lacking the proper words to describe the experiences I was having. But then I took a class that changed my perspective. As part of my training to be a writing center tutor, I read Vershawn Ashanti Young's piece, Should Writers Use Their Own English? In it, he argues for something called code meshing, which is the blending of multiple languages and dialects in writing. In his article, he asserts that standard academic English isn't the only professional way to communicate. Reading his work was like flipping a switch for me. I found myself with the proper words to describe my experiences, and I discovered that while at Dickinson, I had been code switching, taking certain words and phrases out of my vocabulary so that I could better fit an academic standard. In fact, while I was drafting my speech, I realized that I had self-censored. When I introduced myself, I said everyone. I say y'all. And I did that so that I would come across as more professional. But most importantly, I began to question why linguistic diversity is so often seen as a hindrance rather than a strength. Code meshing isn't just about writing. It's about voice. It's about preserving authenticity rather than erasing it. Young's article opened a door for me, and I wanted to learn more. And as I researched, I discovered that linguistic bias is deeply ingrained in academic spaces. Specifically, dialects associated with the South, Black English, and multilingual speakers are often seen as unprofessional or incorrect. It's not just a preference for clarity, it's a manner of gatekeeping that completely devalues these ways of thinking and expressing ideas. But code meshing challenges that, and by allowing multiple languages and dialects to coexist, it creates linguistic empathy and makes readers engage with writing in a new way, one where they're able to learn something new rather than reject something because it isn't familiar. But learning about code meshing didn't just give me a vocabulary. It gave me a mission. As someone who will be a writing center tutor for both English and Spanish next semester, I want to help create an environment where students don't feel pressured to strip their writing of personality or cultural identity so that they can better fit into an outdated academic standard. I want to help writers make themselves better communicators while still expressing themselves. Because at the end of the day, writing isn't about sounding a certain way. It's about being understood. And that understanding should go both ways. I now find myself engaging with language in new ways. I no longer see my dialect as something to hide, and I encourage others to use theirs. And I recognize that language is so much more than words. It's culture, it's personal, and it's history. And as a writing center tutor, I want to help create an environment where linguistic diversity isn't just accepted, but where it's valued. Because when we listen, and I mean really listen, to the way that people write and the way that people speak, we'll find ourselves engaging with much more than just language. We're engaging with people. And at the end of the day, that's what education should be about. I thank you all for your time.